You also mentioned the priestly and royal aspects of the covenant. What can we learn from the priests and the kings?
Israel had its priests. They made sacrifices on their altars. Sacrifice is a plea to God to forgive us of the judgment on our sin that we so rightly deserve. Priestly office in the Old Testament is a recognition that we need more than the prophetic vision. And we have more than the prophetic judgment. We have a God who forgives sin. And anticipating things to come, Psalm 51:17, the sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. And there was a third office in ancient Israel, the king. We had the prophet Isaiah, the priest Aaron, the king David. The kingship arose in Israel in order to organize and stabilize the holy commonwealth of the chosen people. Human life not only needs visions to pursue and forgiveness to cover our sins, we also need the power to sustain life together, to rule over, to overrule the passions that make the pains in the body politic. We need governance, a model of what life together, political life together, should be like.
But David's dynasty collapsed. Why was the covenant with David a reason for hope?
There's a picture painted in the 53rd chapter of Isaiah to which Christians return ever and again because it rings true. It anticipates something which, as Christians, we believe has come to be about a prophet, a priest, and a king, implicit in the offices in Israel. Listen to these great words. He had no form of majesty that we should look at him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering, acquainted with grief, with infirmity. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried away our diseases. Yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God, afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. On him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. Here is the hope of a coming Messiah, who is the suffering servant, not the heroic figure of macho proportions, but one who is vulnerable, who through vulnerability brings victory. Here is a prophet who is despised by others for envisioning the great shalom. Here is the priest who was wounded for our iniquities, who has carried our bruises. Here was a majesty, a king, but a king that was lowly instead of rich and magnificent. But the very lowliness was his magnificence. The passage read through Christian eyes is, of course, the anticipation of the one who came, Jesus Christ, who carries the prophetic, the priestly, and the royal office. To that we will be turning in the next chapter.
You've noted a number of times how Christians interpret the Hebrew Scriptures. What's the relationship of the Christian faith to Judaism, of Christ to Israel?
This is the generation that cannot forget the Holocaust. And even before that, the persecution of Jews throughout Christian history. Even to this day, anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism is all around us. Some of this has come from Christian teaching. The teaching is, or was, that there is no more place for Israel after the coming of the Messiah. Christians do believe that the Messiah has come in Jesus Christ, and that is one thing that distinguishes Christians from Jews. But Christians also believe that the covenant with Israel continues. As Paul says in Romans 11:29, the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. In those chapters where he's talking about the Jewish people, notice not the land, we're not talking about the land, the state of Israel, but about the Jewish people. God will have a continuing bonding with them to the very end of time. How do we put together the belief that God acted decisively in Jesus Christ? That's the next chapter of our story. Decisively to redeem the world, that he is the Messiah who has come. How do we put that together with the teaching that Israel's covenant continues to this very day? The jury is out on this, and Christians and Jews are in dialogue about these matters. And we have to continue to be in that conversation. One thing we do know, and that is that Christians stand alongside of Jews in the struggle against hate, in the struggle against anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism. Both religions believe in the coming of shalom. Christians believe that Jesus Christ is that shalom which has come. And yet we each are partners in waiting for the great day when all will live in peace and freedom. To that we witness, and toward that we work. We've now concluded 3 lessons dealing with the covenant. This is the 3rd chapter in the biblical story, and it ranges all the way from the universal covenant of Noah, the rainbow sign in which God promises to stick with the world through thick and thin, and God gives glimpses of the way the world should work. And then the particular covenant God makes with the Jewish people, the covenant with Abraham and Sarah, and with Moses, with the prophets, with David. We can represent this chapter on the covenant with the same 2 hands we used to illustrate chapters 1 and 2. You recall in chapter 1, God's hand reaches out to the world, our hand. And in chapter 2, our hand makes a fist and shakes it in the face of God and collapses on the ground in a stumble and fall. But now God's hand reaches in the form of a rainbow over our fallen world, the covenant with Noah. And then this hand comes down and makes contact at one point, the covenant with the Jewish people. The promise of God that once again the world will be reconnected, bonded in a life together. But there is another chapter to this story. Christians, as they come to the end of the Hebrew Bible, stand on tiptoe, believing yet something will come. And that next chapter of the story is Jesus Christ. And we'll turn to that in our next lesson.